Welcome to the Escology Podcast. This is Cliff, and we're joined today by Scott Buwalda. Hi, Scott.
Good morning. How are you?
Good, sir. So, Scott and I have known each other since early 2000s. Again, around the time the Mecca rules started out, working on those. We had a lot of communication back and forth on that. Also, at the time, I had a 240SX, which obviously he's done quite a bit with, so I had contacted him for information on that, and he was definitely one of the more approachable of the major competitors at the time, and always wanted to help people out and give advice and equipment advice or installation advice and work things out. Around the time, I think he'd won his first expert championship in 1998, and of course have been competing for quite a few years before that. So Scott, if you could give us kind of a introduction on how you got into car audio in the first place in competition?
Sure. So like every 16-year-old, you become immediately interested in cars and music, and I guess the natural melding of the two items created by my love for car audio. So dating myself a little bit here, back in about 1986, 87, had my first car and immediately began playing with it to enhance the audio system as well as other parts of the car. And it turned into a passion and a love, which eventually turned into a career.
What was your first memorable win?
My first memorable win, which was a little bit of a shock even to me, was the 1993 Spring Break Nationals. And that was back in the time period when the Spring Break Nationals had 15 to 25 cars in each class. So if you placed top 5 at the Spring Break Nationals, you had a car that was formidable.
Right.
What made this an incredibly great win for me was the vehicle was a 1990 Mustang that we built outside in the parking lot. And I was coerced, I guess, by various friends and whatnot to go straight into the pro class and foregoing my time in the amateur class. And so this was my debut show as a pro. Back then it was called Pro 1-100. So you were limited to 100 watts in the car. Again, the class was absolutely stacked at that year's Spring Break Nationals, and I got first place. So that's probably the most memorable win. And I knew I was onto something there at that point in time, and I kind of had the taste of blood in my mouth then at that point, and I wanted more and more.
Right. So what was that your first build as far as that you were proud of and bringing out, or were there others before that?
It was the first build that I was proud of, yes. Prior to that, there was a Nissan Sentra that I built out that was quite ratchet, using a term that my 15-year-old daughter would say. We had tweeters in the headliner, the mid-bass were 4-inch. I mean, there was 212s and 215s in a common chamber subwoofer enclosure, all run by an Orion 225 HCCA 50-watt amplifier. So that was probably my learning curve vehicle, and I kind of parlayed all of that learning into the Mustang build, which I did do a little bit of competing with that vehicle in college in the early 90s, 1990, 1991, but did a fresh build, and I was sponsored by MTX back then, 1993 debut of the vehicle. That was when MTX was strong into the car audio competition scene, and there was a select group of competitors known as the MT Experts. And this actually predates the MTX Thunder Force days, right, which many people are very familiar with those guys. So I was one of the 7 or 8 MT Experts that made the circuit around the United States. And we did a lot of kamikaze missions, my wife and I, to hit shows all around the southeastern United States with that vehicle.
So was that your first sponsorship then at a manufacturer level?
Yeah, first sponsorship was MTX. And I had some friends at then Sound Advice in South Florida that helped me procure that sponsorship and helped me design the system. Of course, the rest was history. From there, we've been able to build several different vehicles using several different manufacturers' products, and but MTX was the first as an MT Expert.
What followed the Mustang?
So the Mustang was retired in the spring of 1995, and I immediately bought a white 240SX, and I went to work that summer, having already been accumulated enough points for the IASCA finals that year. That was back when you had to accumulate points to attend the season-ending finals.
Right.
So I brought out the 1995 Nissan 240SX to the IASCA finals in 1995, and that was essentially the debut show for that vehicle. And that was a really fun car, and that was really, I really cut my teeth in the expert level side of car radio competition was using that 240SX.
What were some of the highlights of the iterations of that vehicle?
So a lot of people remember the 240SX because it was pretty crazy with the motorization. It was the first, as far as I know, the first to use a dedicated large subwoofer in the dashboard. Other folks had used large mid-bass in the dash, but I think that it was the first to have a large subwoofer in the dashboard, which was a 12-inch. It was the first car to utilize motorized kick panels that were aimable and could be saved by a computer GUI preset. So you could actually tune the front stage to stage width, stage depth, tight focus, center image, and a combination of all three. So it was a pretty cool car that has seen many different iterations throughout the years, but that car saw the greatest amount of success at the 1998 finals, as you had mentioned previously, where I took the expert championship. I think that was in Greenville, South Carolina that year.
To back up a little bit, how did you find competition in the first place and get into it?
1986, 87, my friend Philip Tretton from high school got me involved in car audio. It was the natural progression back in those days. You know, when you built a car, you wanted to compete it to see how you stacked up against the competition. And this was in the days of the Car Audio Nationals, which is also known as CAN, which predated the IASCA format. So I competed in CAN for a year or two. My first show was I think it was in the spring of 1987, where I got fourth place with the Nissan Sentra. And it was, looking back, the car was laughable. Of course, I had no technique or technology to the car. It was a hodgepodge of equipment, but like I said, I learned a lot from that car, and I ended up selling it and picking up the Ford Mustang a little bit later on, and kind of used that indoctrination into car audio to further better myself and to enhance my car audio knowledge, I guess.
Like when I knew you in the early 2000s and throughout, I would say, your career since then, you're very influential in terms of sponsors. I think flock to you more than most because when you use something, you sold it. I mean, it's one of those things where when you had used something in your vehicle, there was a definite trend where then a bunch of other people started using similar equipment in their vehicles. At what point did you get the idea to make your own speakers?
So yeah, I guess to address the first part of your statement, there was always a good return on investment to my sponsors. I was never that guy that took the product and ran. And I've had that happen to me as the owner of Hybrid Audio, where we would sponsor a vehicle or a person and give them a great discount on gear and never see them hit the lanes. And that's happened many, many times. That's why a lot of companies today are very gun shy about providing equipment to consumers. The breakout for me was, as you had mentioned, trying to be influential in the car to competition circuits. I guess it was probably the 240SX that put me on the map with all of the intricate motorization details and whatnot. The unique ideas applied to installation that kind of put me on the map and gave notice to the people in my class and other people in the circuit that I had some pretty unique ideas and some off-the-wall ideas and some crazy concepts and ideas that I wanted to incorporate into vehicles. That was noted several times throughout my car audio competition career. Just jumping forward briefly, in the 2002 timeframe, I debuted the Nissan Altima. Back then was groundbreaking. That was in the time period of everyone doing painted fiberglass tubs, and every car looked the same. And I came out with a vehicle at that point in time which was very modular, and it showed off stuff in cars that no one had ever shown off before, which included wiring and wiring cosmetics and integration of exotic materials and whatnot. that car was unique in the fact that we used a metal amplifier rack, and we kept the trunk stock essentially, and worked around that. And it's always fun to see an installation technique that you pioneered that became popular after you debuted it.
So following the Altima around that same time, you were also rebuilding the 240SX. I've talked about the story before, but I think around the time 2002 finals and through 2002, when you had the white 240SX with the 12-inch subwoofer on the dash and massive amounts of power and amplifiers and everything else going on, that year you went through pretty much dominating Spring Break Nationals, Steel Valley Regionals. I think the highest scorer to date at Steel Valley Regionals with that car. And then came into finals, getting 5th place. And it was, at least watching from my perspective through that year, it seemed to me that that was 2002 was kind of the make it or break it year for you personally, in that if you had gone through that year undefeated and won finals, you might have stopped there.
Yeah, I mean, 2002 was a devastating year. I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, you're right. I won the Spring Break Nationals that year. I won Steel Valley Regionals. I won the Invitational round for Steel Valley. I even won, this is funny, I competed in IDBL at the Steel Valley Regionals that year, and I won that class with a 149 or 152 dB reading in that car. And you're right, I went to finals that year as the odds-on favorite to win, and I got 5th place. And that was just absolutely devastating to me. And I did probably what I shouldn't have done, and that was to tear the car apart and rebuild it. Okay. What I should have done is just kept the course and made enhancements from there. But I'm not entirely sure I got a fair shake on judging that year, but I think I'm sure every competitor will say that,
right?
At one point or another in their career. But I'm pretty sure that I didn't get a fair shake. And that was the year that all of the experts listened to each other's cars, 2002. All of my friends in the lanes at that point agreed that I had the car that was there. That was the one that was to be beaten. Right. That was the car to beat. I was actually shocked when I got 5th place. Anywho, I digress. So I think 2002 was the launching board to bigger and better things. 2003, right. I began tearing the 240SX apart, which would eventually become widely known as Black Betty. It took me 7 years and 10,000 hours of labor to build the car, but nonetheless, it was the turning point for me, and it was kind of the motivation I needed to carry on to do something bigger and better, and something that pushed even myself beyond my own limits.
Now, during that time period between like 2004 and 2008, it seems, especially, and those were years that I was not involved in car audio and we weren't in conversation or anything. But it seems like a whole lot of things happened during that time. In that 2005, 2006 era, you started Hybrid Audio Technologies. At the same time, you were going through several big iterations with the 240. Went from white to blue to black. And it seems like a lot of the interior work and stuff that's still there today was done during that time period. And I assume there was some personal stuff going on as well, all at the same time, because there was a lot accomplished in a short period of time.
Yeah. The time period of 2003 through 2006 was a very mixed bag of stuff. I mean, 2003, I lost my dad to cancer, and I used the 240SX build as a coping mechanism to kind of pass time. And right. So I was 3 years deep into the 240SX project when my mom died in 2006, and that just rocked my world. Here you've got a vehicle that's a multi-year project, and for those that are listening, if you've ever had a multi-year project, you know how difficult it is. After the excitement, after the initial honeymoon wears off, you're stuck with a car that's in 10,000 pieces, right, and is $100,000 short of being done. So here I am with no mom and no dad in 2006 and a car that's in 10,000 pieces. It was tough. It was tough. And as you mentioned, in that same time period, 2004, 2005, hybrid audio was born out of a coffee shop, a paper napkin design drawing amongst a couple of good friends at the 2004 finals. That was the last year the Ultima campaign was complete. And when I sold it to a buddy by the name of Rick Nichols, who went on to win a few more championships out of that car. But yeah, 2003 to 2006 was a pretty crazy set of years, and I probably wouldn't redo them over if I had to.
I know there was a time period in there that you weren't competing in a personal vehicle, right? So like between about the time that you started hybrid to the time that you brought Black Betty out, most of that time period seemed to be going into other people's championships, right?
Yeah, I mean, I used to keep track. It's difficult, but at one point, I think I had 111 IASCA, USAC, MECA, and SLAP championships to my credit. 111 was my last count. There's probably a lot more than that now. That doesn't include second through fifth either. But you're right. From when I retired the Ultima in 2004, and then I debuted Black Betty in 2010-ish, I guess, or 2009. There was a 5-year span there that I was just focused on living vicariously through other people's vehicles, and it was fun. I had a lot of good time honing my tuning skills on everyone else's vehicles and stepping back from the car to competition scene and seeing it through the eyes of a spectator was kind of cool. But as mentioned, back in 1993, I had that taste of blood in my mouth that I wanted to, that insatiable desire to compete. I'm a competitor. In every part of my life, I compete. So I needed to get that car done in its black iteration to get it back out there and do what no one had ever done before, and that was to basically take advantage of the IASCA rule where overall creativity was unlimited points.
Right.
We successfully did that, obviously.
Yeah, because in the second year you competed, Black Betty, overall points were like a 996.5 or something like that?
Yeah, so there's a story there that a lot of people don't know. The installation, back then in the expert class, installation was awarded unlimited points. So if you chased the unlimited creativity points, you could actually have a score that's literally unheard of by today's standards, and there's a reason for that. So the story goes, and I guess it was 2011 or 2012 now, where the second year of Black Betty campaign, I brought the vehicle to the IASCA finals that year. I told the judges straight up, I said, look, my goal here is to break 1,000 points. And they kind of laughed and chuckled and said, okay, sure. But the car had the capability of scoring between 1,400 and 1,500 points by my calculation. So the judges spent 2.5 hours judging the car. They came to me and they said, look, your goal was to get 1,000 points. So we stopped counting at 1,000. So you should have 1,002 or 1,004 just to checkbox it. We stopped judging your car at the B pillars. So they didn't judge anything beyond the B pillars. I said, okay, sure. As long as we got the 1,000 points, I'm good with that. So imagine my chagrin when they called from the stage that the score was a 996.5.
So close.
I couldn't be too angry, obviously, because it was the highest score ever recorded in any competition format anywhere in the world at any point in time. But nonetheless, when you set a goal and you don't reach the goal because of
3 points because they stopped.
Because they stopped judging the car, yeah.
Wow. So to back up again, and because there's like several timelines here, like I mentioned, when you were working on the white 240 in like 2001, 2002 era especially, it seemed like there was something, even when it was winning and everything else, there was something that was insatiable inside of you, like you weren't obviously competing. A vehicle in the lanes is a huge part of who you are and your life and timeline and everything else, but it seemed like doing all this for somebody else's equipment and credit wasn't something that was satisfactory for you. Even back then, it felt like maybe, I don't remember any talk back then of, what I should do is start my own car audio company. But the the puzzle pieces were getting put together at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I was offering an awful lot of credibility to various manufacturers that, you're right. There was something more there that needed to be
Filled.
satiated,
Yeah,
I guess.
right.
Yeah, to be filled, and that was to have something that of my own design and of my own criteria that I could compete and campaign and win with. I've got mouths to feed like everyone else does. I'm a father of two kids. Back in 2002, I had two very young children. Actually, my daughter hadn't even been born yet. My son in 2002 would have been 4 years old, and my daughter would have been born in 2003. So there was preschool to pay for, and cars and transportation and life insurance and health insurance and stuff of that nature. So there was always the desire in my mind to build something, kind of parlay my love of car audio into a business. And everyone told me, everyone said, when you get into car audio as a profession, you're not going to love it anymore. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I still love car audio as much today as I did, back in 1988 when I first really got serious about this. There was always an end goal in my mind, was to, I guess, help myself in the same way that I've helped other companies establish their own brands. Like, for example, I established the DLS brand name myself and two or three other guys, Keith Doney and Phil Petrock and a few others, that we established DLS in the United States back in 2003, 2004. And I saw how easy it was to establish that company in this country. I thought, why not do that for myself? And that's kind of how Hybrid Audio was born.
It seemed at the same time as well that, again, I wasn't really involved in car audio from like 2004 to 2010, but it seemed like there was a trend with, while you were campaigning the White 240, for example, with MB Court speakers. MB Court was then bought by Rockford, which then created changes during that time, and nobody knew what was going to happen with that. And MB Court was kind of one of the last holdouts of high-end car audio speakers at the time, and everything seemed to be very cookie cutter in the same fashion that you were kind of disgruntled with building all this kind of for somebody else. At the same time, it seemed like there was some frustration of not having the right solutions for competition vehicles. Everything was a very cookie cutter. Here's a 6.5-inch DIN speaker. Here's a 5.25-inch speaker. Here's a 4-inch speaker, and here's a tweeter that fits a hole. Everything was designed for a vehicle fit for dealers versus the maximum sound quality for a vehicle. There wasn't a lot of emphasis on dedicated mid-ranges at the time. So again, I'm kind of trying to piece together history a little bit and look from the outside without full knowledge of everything. But when you started Hybrid, you pretty much started with one speaker, right? And that was a design of something that wasn't widespread at the time at all.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, let's be honest. For those that are listening to the podcast, the dark ages of car audio were the early 2000s. Sound quality didn't matter. It was loud, and
Flames, chrome,
LED lights and cones, and it was the dark ages of car audio. Let's just be honest about it and call a spade a spade. And you're right. I was disenchanted with the direction that the car audio industry was going. The products were awful, in my opinion. We were getting by with stuff coming from Europe that was off the wall and was not readily available. And you're right. There were certain topologies that were definitely missing in the car audio environ, and that was the dedicated mid-range. Back in the early days of the early 2000s, you're right, there was two-way component sets with a mid-bass and a tweeter, and if you didn't want that, you might have a company that would build a 4-inch mid-range, but it was difficult to put the 4 in a non-custom location.
Right.
So the very first product that I built as Hybrid Audio was a 3-inch driver, and back then, no one built a 3. I'm going back here in my memory here, but I'm pretty sure that there was no widely distributed brand name that was building a 3-inch mid-range, so we were the first. I'm going to take credit for that. Some may disagree, but I was the first mainstream car audio manufacturer to build a 3-inch driver. So that was the very first thing that I built was in 2005, and in 2006 we debuted it, and it was like the industry was like, "Holy cow, this is crazy! What a great idea! We got a driver that you can fit anywhere in a dashboard, in an A pillar, and in a door, in a kick panel, and etc." And it was a very unique device that kind of put me on the map. And from there, it was a whirlwind. It was like a drug. My customers, they loved the 3, and they started wanting a 6 and a tweeter to go with it, and then a passive crossover to go with that, and then where you at with subwoofers. And before you know it, there was
a whole lot of products.
And there was a blizzard of requests, like this is what I want next. And there was a lot of special interest requests that came through that I had to ignore, of course.
Right.
What you need to build is a really fast 21-inch subwoofer with low inductance. So, like, well, I don't think there's a market for a 21-inch subwoofer.
Right.
But there was certain things that drove the initial thrust of the company, Hybrid Audio, into building products that were needed and wanted by the industry, by those that were in the industry, either as professional installers or as enthusiast members or competitors.
Right. And where a lot of companies have started out with, hey, let's build some equipment, throw it out there, and then find somebody to endorse it. You're able to go in endorsing your own product, especially internationally, where competitors have a very high value in the Asian countries, especially. So it seems like you were able to ramp things up to a certain point very quickly with that, and with your knowledge of competition and putting together a team. I think that was one of the biggest things that was always your advantage, even in building a car, was pulling 5 or 6 guys together and working in your driveway and building an amazing piece of machinery in a fairly short period of time comparatively for what you were building. It seems like you took a lot of your skills and what you learned in building cars to build the company and take that abroad.
Yeah, I mean, in the formidable years of Hybrid Audio, you pointed out that I was not competing, which is probably the reason why we had near instantaneous success in the competition lanes, because I was devoting my time to other people's builds.
Right.
Which, in hindsight, was probably a very good thing, because if I had been competing, my focus would have been elsewhere.
Just you.
Just me. But back in that day and age, in the IASCA competition format circuit, companies would seek out established competitors,
right,
and get them to change gear. I did the exact opposite. I seeked out nobodies. And,
right.
And I don't mean that in a bad way.
No, but guys coming up who wanted to learn and get better. And
I felt like a college football coach that saw promise in the high school football player, and I gave him a shot, a sponsorship, or
right. Assistance.
And yeah. So the very first year of Hybrid Audio, we brought, I think, 2 or 3 cars to the IASCA finals that year. That was 2005. We won a couple of trophies. And in fact, we won a championship trophy in one of these cars. It didn't even have production product yet at that point. It was all prototype. So we cut our teeth in the competition circuit immediately with success. And we've bred that success for many, many years subsequent to that. And I'm very, very proud of that. That's a feather in my cap that I look back and I think fondly of those years of taking these guys that had no name brand and investing into them both tangibly and intangibly, and coming out at the other end with championship trophies, and what has resulted is lifelong friendships as well.
Absolutely.
A lot of these guys come hang out at my house, and we have dinner, and when I'm in town, wherever they're located, I seek them out, and
right.
It's a fraternity, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of camaraderie involved. It's always been there. When I kind of came back on the scene, I hadn't really been to competition since like 2002, 2003. And then the first competitions I came back to was around 2011. And then by 2012, it seemed like the competition scene was all but dead. There was, I think, 30-something cars at finals that year in Indy. And it was a very what's going to happen this year with competition style thing. Now there's been a resurgence. It seems like, in the last couple of years now, some of the orgs are having the highest numbers they've ever had at finals. You've been there again since, like you said, 86, 87, when things were just kind of ramping up through the years, and 95 through 98 were probably kind of the high points of competition period, and all the influxes up and down through there and being involved. I mean, there's you and, to a similar degree, Eldridge, and I can't really think of anybody else that has been there active, this whole time up till current date. You never stopped. When there's a lot of the old school mentality of those who competed, for example, in the 90s, that have not competed recently or been involved in the competition scene or anything like that. And everybody wants to look back on the glory days of cardio in the 90s and how we need to get it back to that point or whatever. In your mind, what kind of a overall timeline of cardio competition from the 80s till now, what were kind of the highs and low points in your opinion, as far as how has the essence of cardio competition, especially, how has it kind of changed over the years, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so like in everything, there's life cycles. You have a birth and a death.
Right.
And I think at one point we were close to death. There was a low point in competition, as you had mentioned. Those that had been around for a while, we hunkered down and we made through it. We still supported the competition formats. My competition format of choice, of course, is IASCA. It always has been. Although I do support the other organizations as well. So I bled IASCA during the lean years, and I made it a point to breed these vehicles to compete in the IASCA competition format. So even in the lean years, we were still bringing, as hybrid audio, we were still bringing between 12 and 15, sometimes 18 cars to these finals. But you're right. I mean, there's something to be said about the certain life cycle that has occurred, and now we're seeing a renaissance. There was a renaissance, in my opinion, back in 2005-ish, 2006, with car audio sound quality becoming more important, and that was back when everyone was doing SPL. And I think we're on the cusp of a new renaissance here, where the do-it-yourselfer, the weekend warrior is the most important thing right now, I believe, in cardio competition. Certainly, hybrid audio, we have a strong team that we do very well at the IASCA finals and MECA finals every year. But I think that the real kudos have to go out to the guys that are, essentially amateurs at heart, that are buying their gear, they're helping each other, they're working on their cars in their garages and in their parking lots, and they're the ones that are kind of pushing this forward now. Now we're seeing, like I said, the renaissance of car audio, where we're seeing 90 and 100 cars at the IASCA MECA finals again, which is great. That's really exciting to see that level of participation. And I've listened to these cars, and the gap has closed between the good cars and the really great cars. It used to be that you'd go to a finals event and there would be 10 or 12 cars that were truly great, and there was 50 or 80 that were just good. Now it's like 75 or 80% of the cars are great, and the other 20% are on the cusp of being great,
right?
Really close to being great. So for that, I'm thankful, because I love car audio, and I love competition, and I'm glad that this has survived the dark ages, so to speak.
And it seems like, outside looking in, again, when you go back to the quote unquote glory days of the 90s, and people saying, 30, 40 cars in a class and whatever, that leaves a lot of room for a lot of people to slip through the cracks. And they're also, it doesn't seem, again, hearing the stories and reading between the lines, it doesn't seem like there was much in the way of cooperation between the high level competitors and the new guys,
Yeah, there's a lot of attrition there, which makes me really sad that you'd have a guy that spends a lot of money and time building a vehicle only to disappear a year later. And that makes me sad, because that person undoubtedly has a bad taste in their mouth when they leave the sport. So from that standpoint, I wonder where all these guys have gone. They probably have a very negative view of car audio. I have a very positive view of car audio. I have a lot of fond memories, and I can't help but to think that the attrition rate back in those dark ages of car audio
Right.
has led to a lot of negativity towards the car audio competition side.
In our previous interview with Chris Pate, he spoke quite a bit about the 2000, I believe, 11 finals, where he competed the single seat Civic, and that was the year that you competed Black Betty and received the highest score ever. And we kind of discussed the fact that with his vehicle coming in, it created a whole division with Expert Solo being created, which has since been sunset. And then with Black Betty pretty much just walking all over the competition for 2 years, created the separation of install and sound in the ASCA format. Do you think between then and now, and seeing the evolvement of car audio competition since then, do you think those were the right ways to handle that? I mean, do you think install and sound should be together, especially at the higher levels, or do you think it was the right move to separate that out?
Wow, that's a hot topic. I'm an old school guy, but I don't think so old school that I can't make changes that are necessary to foster the environment that we're in now.
Right.
And by the way, Chris Pate and I are very good friends, and we communicate a lot. And back in 2011, there was a phone call that occurred between Chris and myself, and he said, "Are you coming to the finals this year with that black car?" And I said, "I am." And he goes, "Well, then I'm going to push for an Expert Solo class so that we don't have to compete against each other." And I thought that was really cool. To our credit, this is a little bragging point for both of us, and I hope it's not taken the wrong way by your listeners, but Chris Pate and I are the only two competitors that have ever had rules changed because of us. Chris Pate was building a car with one seat, so they had to find a home for him, because it really wasn't fair for the 2-seat guys to compete against a 1-seat car, because that's an idealized scenario to have perfect path length differences between your left and right speakers. And then likewise with Black Betty, the rules were changed immediately after the Black Betty campaign to limit installation scoring and to separate installation from sound quality. So to our credit, Chris Pate and I are the only ones that have ever had rules changed because of us, I think. I could be wrong, but...
Or at very least the entire division's being broken up in major ways.
Right. So I'm not so old school that I have to have a class where sound and install are together in one format. I would love that, because it separates the men from the boys, but if you're talking about attrition, you will have a watershed of competitors leave the organizations, and if there's a push to put sound and install together. What I like is the way EMA does it, the European Mobile Multimedia Association, for which I'm a head judge for. Both of us are head judges. We're the first and only head judges for EMA in the United States. And what they do is everyone does a little bit of an install score sheet, and it's very basic. And I would be a proponent for adding that in the IASC and MECA formats, so that it's basically a safety score sheet. The judges make sure that everything is fused properly, everything is mounted solidly. It's not a danger or a hazard to you during driving conditions.
Right.
It's not going to catch fire. And this install score sheet could be 20 or 30, 40 points that basically ensures that the car is safe and that it's not going to catch fire. Like I said, in the middle of the judging lanes, that all batteries are properly vented, and that all amplifiers are properly fused, and speaker grills are attached, and that their speakers are protected from physical damage and whatnot. I'd be a proponent for that. But if we go back to the 1997 criteria of making everyone do a sound and install score sheet, you're going to see probably 70 or 80% of the competitors quit because of that. And we don't want that.
Right. Well, and I think if nothing else, and I've said this before, but if nothing else, having some level of presentation by the competitor to somebody is important. I think that's one of the things that was always one of your strongest assets, I think, in competition was your presentations. I mean, again, that year in 2012 in Indy, I remember we were outside, I think, because the SPL lanes were so bad. Carbon monoxide was about to kill us. It was like 30 degrees outside. And I know you don't like cold weather very much. And so, but you're outside in an alley, basically doing your install presentation. And my wife and I were standing like 20 feet away from the car while you were doing it. And all of a sudden I see the back seat fly 15 feet across the lane while you're doing the install presentation. And I know there was probably most people have seen the install presentation of your Altima you did at spring break, where you're pushing the car back and forth with a rod by the amp rack and freaking everybody out thinking the car was going to hit them. I mean, there's a lot of those style of stories, I think, over the years with different competitors who have run into good or bad during their presentations. But that was a big part of what made competition more interactive than just handing over the keys and having a judge listen to it and then blaming the judge whether they listen to it right or not.
I do have a bone to pick with some certain competitors that don't even care about their cars. And I know installation is not judged, but when you can see old McDonald's French fries underneath the front seat and there's an inch of dust on the dashboard and the engine compartment looks like it's got 300,000 miles on it, that does bother me a little bit because it is a car show after all.
Right.
And if you have spectators walking around, which undoubtedly you do, because Iasca and Mecca, they want to have gate entry fees
right.
to try to make ends meet, right? They got to at least break even to do this. It's a business after all. And when you see these cars that look like, a used car lot, not even a used car lot, I do get a little bit disgruntled about that. It's not very many people, but once in a while you'll see a car that comes through with stuff that's general cleanliness could have corrected.
Right.
But you're right. As far as the install presentations go, I really took pride in all of that. It was my goal to create an enthusiastic environment for the judge, to show the judge that my enthusiasm. And I did some really crazy off the wall things. As you mentioned, I threw the back seat out of the car, and I did that because in that era, Photoshop was very prevalent, and a lot of competitors were Photoshopping stuff in their cars in order to avoid doing certain things, like zip ties every 2 or 3 inches. And a lot of competitors would Photoshop zip ties on their wires and then have that in your photo book. So the reason why I took the back seat out of my G35 back in 2012, as you had mentioned, was to show the judge in real time what the wiring looked like without having them to rely on a photo book. And to create the atmosphere, the energetic atmosphere, I would actually take that back seat and throw it literally as far as I could, sometimes 40 or 50 feet. And the judge would be like, holy crap, what did he just do? And then what you're left with is the bare metal underneath the back seat, where the wiring is gorgeous. It's pristine. It looks as good as the stuff that's exposed on the other parts of the installation. So.
Right. Now you have, at this point, to your own name, 10 expert Iasca championships that are combined between expert and expert solo, sound and install. What are your feelings regarding the 2-seat versus 1-seat debate, especially at the higher classes?
That's a hot topic too. That's almost as hot as the install and sound.
And again, it all kind of works together, because at the same time that the install was separated out because of your car, then we had 1-seat essentially introduced as a concept because of Pate's car. Mm-hmm. And things all changed because of those vehicles, but then it never really, in my opinion, came back together in a cohesive way. So if you could make the rules now yourself and say, here's what an expert car is.
Yeah, I mean, expert is the best of the best. Let's be honest. Anything contrary to that is criminal to the intent of the expert division. My opinion is expert should be 2-seat.
Right.
It's the best of the best. You just got to do it. However, insisting that 2-seat be judged for every class would create a watershed of competitors again.
Right.
That's the old school coming out in me is 1-seat is very easy to accomplish. Let's just be honest with you. With today's processing power, you've got a 1/3 octave equalizer on every channel, and you've got time domain adjustment and phase domain adjustment and amplitude adjustment. And some great test gear that you could have plugged into your cell phone. That I mean, these are things that we didn't have 10 or 15 years ago. That,
Right.
so one seat is very easy to accomplish and accommodate as long as your installation is correct. But two seat is very difficult. So if I were to ever build another car, it would be a two seat car.
Right. Through your time, I think, again, just this is the fanboy coming out in me, and I'm not being a very objective journalist here, but when going through like your sound quality summit trainings and stuff, and listening to your presentations on those that are multiple days and multiple countries, I think there was one point, I think it was actually in China, when you were doing a presentation, going through a translator, and of course everything is extremely slow and broken down, everything else. And at that point, during one of those things, I think something between the time and phasing, it finally made sense to me. Like it clicked just right there. After hearing the same stuff for a decade, it finally clicked in my head, and I could visualize it. Through your time, obviously you've gotten very deep in different parts of doing huge installs and competing and judging, and then on the sound quality side, and then developing a speaker. I mean, it's not like you are born with that information in your head, but in terms of any of it, sound quality or competition or whatever, what was one of your biggest aha moments during that time that is memorable, that when you finally figured out, oh, that's what I need to do to win, or that's what I need to do to make it sound better, or that's what I need to make it install, and I think there's probably been quite a few of those because of some of the crazy things that you've done, especially on the install side as well as on the product side. But are there any of those things that kind of, when it clicked, it made a significant difference in how you approached?
Yeah, and you touched on it briefly. It was the time is phase and phase is time philosophy. And when I'm tuning a car, that is literally one of the first things that I will do after frequency centering, using equalization would be to use decade tracks to align the phase to the center of the vehicle. And that's just huge. I mean, once you've got the car within absolute phase, or not really absolute phase, but relative phase, because really there's no such thing as absolute phase. Once the vehicle is in relative phase from your driving position, everything just falls into place. I mean, it's so easy to tune a car once everything is in relative phase to your ears. Equalization becomes so much easier. And all of that is accomplished through time domain and amplitude domain adjustments. That was probably my aha moment, was finding that. And I'm getting into the nitty gritty of tuning your car when you hear the in phase, out of phase tracks going over and over and over and over again. And I have this really weird and uncanny ability to hear phase. I wouldn't say I'm good enough to tell you what degree out of phase things are, but certainly I have the ability to tell when something is out of phase. It's usually very obvious to me that that's what the first thing that needs to be corrected is. When the phase is right in the car, you're on your way.
Right. Now I know you're a musician as well. What's your background there?
So I'm a drummer, percussionist. I actually do a little bit of singing in the shower as well. But yeah, I mean, I've had the opportunity to professionally play several times. In fact, heading out of high school, I had the opportunity with my band to move to Southern California at the ripe age of 17 or 18 years old to pursue a career in music. And I'm not sure what that would have meant. It probably would have meant serving slushies at the 7-Eleven because music is a very difficult industry to crack into. But at that point in time, we had a recording contract with Light Lexicon Records, and I had the opportunity to go and pursue my dream of being a professional drummer. But I went to college instead, and I don't regret that decision because I met my wife, and as a result of my wife, I have my 2 great kids and a great education. And so I don't have any regrets with that standpoint, but nonetheless, I have been a musician all my life. So has Mark Eldridge, and we have a lot to talk about when Mark and I get together. We used to be just absolute terrible enemies in the competition lanes. We didn't like each other much. But now that we've both retired from the competition circuit, we're actually great friends now, and he's a drummer as well. So,
right.
And I do sing once in a while. I probably mostly in the shower, like I mentioned. But yeah.
So if with your obvious experience in car audio and tuning and musical background and everything else, last question and a half. If you could pick two tracks, one track to evaluate a system and one track to jam out to a system after you're done with it and happy with it, what would those two tracks be?
Oh gosh, I'm an '80s metalhead. Probably a lot of people don't know that about me, but if I had to put a track to jam to, it would be undoubtedly something from the '80s. For Whom the Bell Tolls, or something crazy like that. But not sure if I ever really defined sound quality track that I listened to get that feeling. I'm a big Yes fan. It might be a Yes track or a Rush track. That's a tough question. I've got so many that I would lean into the
right.
Test the sound quality prowess of the system.
As far as the just the evaluation side of it, is there any go-to tracks that you use? Like if somebody says, "Hey, come listen to my car and give me feedback on it," and you have a limited selection, what would be your go-tos?
There's a track by Yes called Shoot High, Aim Low. I would use that. Of course, there's a couple of Dire Straits that are always good. There's a couple of Dolly Parton tracks, believe it or not, that I've grown fond of. Gosh, of course you got to use the Jurassic Park track to make sure that you've got some subsonic sub bass in your car.
Jurassic Lunch.
Jurassic Lunch, yeah. That's usually a pretty fun track. That's a great question. I've got a CD of a mixed bag of stuff that I listen to at events. I'm kind of ashamed to mention this. And Mo Sabrin is going to kill me when he hears me. Here's what I'm about to say. But up until recently, I hadn't even listened to the Ayahuasca CD. Because I just, I've got a reference to other music that doesn't include the Ayahuasca CD. And
right.
I was at the Ayahuasca finals this year, and I was helping Larry Chisner do the final tune in his car. I think he got second or third place this year. And he was playing music, and I said, "What is this? What CD is this?" He looked at me like I had a third eye, and he goes, "This is the Ayahuasca CD." I was like, "Holy cow, are you serious?"
Oops, sorry.
Sorry. From that standpoint, I'm sure Mo's going to kill me the next time he sees me, but there's a lot of great music out there.
Yeah, use what you're familiar with, right?
Yeah.
All right, sir. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to do this, and I'm sure we'll talk again as events come out next year.
Thank you. I've had a great time.